So today's guest is Zach Kosturos, the host of Operation Upgrade. You can check that out on Spotify, iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, and I certainly hope you will. You know, Proverbs 27:17 reads, "Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another." That's exactly what Zach and I did with regard to this podcast and this conversation. It was simply iron sharpening iron, and I hope that you enjoy it. And please do, in fact, go out and check out his podcast, Operation Upgrade. And hey, if you think this podcast is good, if you enjoy what you're hearing, please share it with somebody who might enjoy it as well. Leave us a rating on iTunes, Spotify. And with that, I'll shut up and get right into the conversation. Thank you so much for listening. Zach, welcome to the Jason Wright Show, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Dude, I am so glad you're here. And it's cool because I literally just I guess it was a warm call. I saw one of your YouTube videos and I saw that you had basically, and that's kind of where I want to start. You had basically, it looked like wiped out anything you'd done prior to, and we're just starting from ground zero to start putting good content out again. And it resonated with me because it's one of the toughest things about being for what I guess content creator, whatever you and I are. And it's one of the toughest things to figure out, because you'll go down the road for a while and then all of a sudden you're like, do I want to completely change direction? And what does that look like? I mean, I switched my podcast, about 4 years ago from Texas Titan, which is my media company, but the Texas Titan podcast completely changed the format and everything. And you went through that. So I wanted to start even before that though. Why did you start a podcast? What do you hope to achieve? And then why did you make the change when you did? And then I found you. I guess I found you kind of right at I think I was like your first new episode or second episode of your new format. That's where I discovered you, and I liked what you had to say. So why'd you change?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me. Pretty excited to be here. It's great to meet you the other day. And I think that, we're pretty well aligned in most of the areas we talked about. As far as why I started making content, so I think I have the heart of a teacher at the end of the day, heart of a father, somebody who wants to, not necessarily be a guru, but just be able to pass on the knowledge and the wisdom that I've gained over the years, share some of the mistakes that I've made, and hopefully help other people avoid those situations and hopefully thrive and flourish. And so I started making content years ago, actually started a media company as well with a friend of mine. And we did that for about a year and a half. And my other businesses just kept me too busy. And so we ended up not continuing with that. But I've always had on my heart to share. And, my biggest challenge has been not knowing exactly what to share, because I really don't like to get pigeonholed into one thing, because I'm just a curious guy. I like to talk about a lot of things. I get bored when I feel like I'm doing the same thing over and over and over again, And so I actually started that YouTube channel during COVID because I was living in Western Washington and things were getting pretty wild. And the temperature was going up pretty high, and so I just felt like, hey, let's try and share some observations and maybe try and provide some different perspectives. And so I did that for a while. To be really honest, I found that as time went on, my just my outlook on the whole situation changed, man. And maybe we can talk about that a little bit. But it started out like, hey, we got to find some common ground here. We got to be reasonable. We got to treat each other the right way. And then the worse that it got, the more I felt myself getting kind of angry, kind of frustrated, to the point that, we ended up moving. We ended up leaving Western Washington. We moved to northwestern Montana, and we love Montana. But, when I look back on it, it's not that I wouldn't have moved. I just think that I think the way I thought about it would have been different. And that's part of why I decided to change things to the format they are today, which is, it's just so easy today to look around at the world and just go, hey, everything's going to, hell in a handbasket. There's so much negativity. There's so much fear. And I think, well, we're the only people who can change that, right? Like, we have a choice to wake up today and to buy into all the hype, to buy into the fear, and let it paralyze us and let it separate us and let it, cause division and destruction. Or we can be the people that just say, hey, like, the world is ripe for an upgrade, right? My life is ripe for an upgrade. I want to help other people upgrade their lives. And so, yeah, I think they're reflecting back, just realizing that, maybe my outlook wasn't as good as I would have liked it to be. And so here's another shot at doing it a better way. And what I hope to get out of it, honestly, and I'm shifting even a little now since I first started it, which is I'm really going to hone in on young men
Yeah.
because I think, it's really hard as I'm sure you know, but when you're just trying to talk to everybody, it's really hard to sort of hone that message. And while I do love talking about lots of different things, when I look at the world today, I think, man, guys who are like me when I was 20, 25, 26, 27, 28, I don't have all the answers. But I have pretty good life experience. I've got a good network of people, and I would really love to help encourage them that, as I like to say, and it's going to start coming out here, is when we upgrade men, we upgrade the future. And it's not that women aren't also important to our future. It's not that women can't upgrade our future, because they can and they are important. It's just I'm not a woman. So I feel called to really speak to the men, the young men, and just say, hey, I think a lot of what we're being sold, like there's a lot of good to it, but it just ends up like if we're a river that's streaming through, it just ends up where we're streaming a little bit off course, and we end up way far away from, I think, where we ultimately want to be. And a lot of that I've learned through my own journey. And so what I hope to get out of it is I hope to encourage some young men that they really can be, their lives can be a catalyst for upgrading the world around them and for overcoming some of the fear and the separation and the anger and just the despair, because we're the only ones who I think really can change it. We got to go do something about it.
So I can echo all of that, and I've kind of gone through the same thing as I've done this podcast. One of the hardest things to do, and it's really one of the reasons why I changed it back when I did from Texas Titan to just the Jason Wright show at the suggestion of my buddy Mitchell Cohen, is my topics I wanted to talk about were so much more broad. And then once you start to get an audience and you start to realize, wow, this is resonating with somebody out there, and you think, okay, well, how can I use this platform to actually make a difference?
Mm.
And what you have mentioned, and I think this is why your initial message that just happened to randomly come across on YouTube, just you talking, and then you and I connecting, and like you and I both said, you know, it was a God thing. It's
Hmm.
I believe it was a divine appointment. It became iron sharpens iron,
Yep.
and I think that this whole our heart for young men is something that, and I'm seeing more and more of this. I mean, we know, those of us who pay attention, we know there's a problem.
Yep.
These young men, I mean, I can't imagine bringing a new son into the world today where from day one, he's hearing things like that, just his genetic makeup has a potential of being something toxic,
Hmm.
and that he is not needed, he's unnecessary. The things that he's really naturally equipped to be good at and to thrive at, he's told, you're really not. You're really no better at those things that you seem to enjoy. And if you are naturally wired, like most boys are, to move and be active and to be rambunctious, then somehow there's something wrong with you and you need to be sedated and calmed down. There's just all these negative forces hoisted towards young boys today. And and we're seeing the results of that. I mean, like I mentioned to you when we just visited, I've got two daughters that are of marrying age. They're 23 and 24. And I worry about, now, fortunately, they both have good boyfriends that are good dudes. I like them, Lachlan and Carmine. This is your girlfriend's dad saying, you guys are good. I like it. You better treat them like princesses. Um, but I see a lot of their friends and the decisions that they're making, and I tell you, it's a double-edged sword, dude. It's not only is it making for more ill-equipped men, but it seems to be making for miserable women. Because when you lose good men, then you're going to lose good men for good women to partner with. And it's a big mistake, man. So as it relates to, let's just kind of double click on that a little bit. What are some of the biggest, like, notable issues that you see with young men today, that they're either they're that the things that they are learning that that might be false teaching, or things that they're not learning that's just being disregarded that they should, to be able to completely fulfill their potential as young men? What are some of those things that you're seeing, man?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So I think that all of the things, whatever they are, can be summed up with the effect that they're having on young men. And I think the effect that they're having on young men is internal conflict. Like internal conflict in the sense that some young men are like, I have no idea what to do. I have no idea what I'm supposed to do, who I'm supposed to be, what my role is, why am I important, how am I important? Like that's internal conflict. For others, it can be, hey, I've been encouraged to, go with the red pill movement, and I'm going to try and get as many ladies as I can, and I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And yet many of those men are saying, hey, that's not very fulfilling. There's something that feels off. Maybe I climbed to what I thought the top of the mountain was, and I'm standing there going, I think I might be on the wrong mountain, right? And so at the end of the day, I think so much of that is internal conflict. And most of the time, what I've learned is that internal conflict, well, I should say all the time, comes down to fear, right? What are we afraid of? And so I think what we're not doing is we're not equipping. So as you were talking about men and what they're inherently good at, what they inherently have in them, it's like this. It's energy. It can be really dangerous, but life sucks without it. What we need is we need a system to harness the energy and to direct it where it's most effective and most fruitful. And so for me, I look at it and I go, hey, up until about 200 years ago, your family probably didn't survive very well or thrive very well without really strong men. Now, have men done bad things over the years? Certainly. But that doesn't mean that everything about men is bad. As a matter of fact, we need men. We need strong men. We need smart men. We need caring men. We need all of those things. We don't need to tear the whole system down and try and build it in our image. What we need to do is we need to harness the good and we need to work on the not so good. And so for me, I think that so many men are just not sure what to do, not sure where to go. And you add on top of that information, people have information overload. And so what I'm really looking for is what are those little hinges that swing the really big doors in their lives, right? And I think some of them, as I've processed through it, and some of what I hope to start sharing and talking to people about on my podcast is, I think it starts with, do we even know the game we're playing, right? Simon Sinek, in one of his books, talks about the infinite game, right? Another guy that I like to listen to, he calls it the empire versus the kingdom. And really, I think that if you're a competitive man, you can end up in a scenario where you're told compete at all odds, you're told crush the competition, right? And it's like, yeah, you might end up at the top, what you think is the top, but you'll end up there alone. And what we really need is we need community. Like we were created to be in community. And so I just think that, again, it's like, I'm not here to say that all the wisdom that we're sharing with young men is wrong. I think a lot of it's good. We got to develop the skills. We got to do those things. But if we're playing the wrong game, right? And if we think the goal of the game is to stand at the top of the mountain while we look down on everyone else, to me, that's building an empire instead of the kingdom. And I'm interested in, like, how do we lift people up around us? How do the upgrades in our life ultimately lead to the upgrades in the people's lives around us? Because to me, I think that's what the point is. And so, that's really the mission that I'm on. Is I don't want to squash ambitious young men's ambition. I just want to help redirect the flow so that as they achieve, as they do the great things they were created to do, they're doing it in a way that's fulfilling and that's impactful for the world around us, because that's what we're here for.
One of the things you mentioned there, that like people didn't survive very well 200 years ago without strong men. I've thought about this a lot lately, because of the reason why we're having this conversation, or at least this portion of the conversation, is because I think it's important right now is to just kind of figure out how I can be a positive force for young men and be a good, I don't know, hopefully a good influence. And, I think that one of the things that's kind of frustrating to me, because I'm like you, dude, there have been times that this podcast, in trying to write, create, and be a positive outlet, has been kind of like a balm for me to overcome just the frustration that we see, the gaslighting, the down is up is down. We live on Misfit Island, and America's become like the worst case scenario. It's ground zero for just Misfit Island. We've got trains with wheels, we got fish flying, birds swimming. And we're told that if we don't just embrace it overnight, then we're bigots, we're closed-minded. You just, all these different forces coming at you. And I thought to myself about this whole male-female issue. I'm like, well, why there's no grace and understanding whenever you had 200 years ago. It's like before there were roads, before the power lines were hung, before all the wars kind of made us into which, the wars, unfortunately, are what civilized most human beings, because this used to be a conquer and conquest. We go through the annals of time. We front to Genghis Khan. I'm actually reading a book right now about Alexander the Great, and the way you spread an empire. You didn't start a big company creating products and then go have subsidiaries and make acquisitions. No, you just went and acquired. You conquered
Mhm.
resources, and it was the men that did that as a means of survival. And there were roles. The man went out and did this, and the women stayed and protected the family. And the women were to be protected because they're the only way that civilization can move forward. And they're more precious in the proliferation of a society, simply because a woman can only have one child for every 9 months. And as we were evolving through the years, through different societies, the chances of her doing that successfully once, much less multiple times, was pretty rare. And but while a man could go out and procreate with as many women, so it was like, if he goes away, well, that's one dude, but a woman losing that's very detrimental. And so all this stuff, and I don't want to sound like it's, and by the way, I've got a wife who's an entrepreneur, runs a business. I'm her biggest cheerleader. I love the fact that she's the kind of the perfect scenario for me. She's strong, she's independent. She could survive tomorrow without me, no problem, other than she loves me and adores me and we complement each other, and she wouldn't want to do that. So, but the, there was somewhere in the line of history where civilization became civil enough, where modern conveniences became convenient enough, and to where all of a sudden it's like, okay, all that's done. And it seems like a lot, not all. I don't want to speak in generalities, but there's a lot of people, both men and women, that say that they seem to think that even though, men, you've been conditioned to do all these things since the beginning of the time, now you need to understand, you need to sit down, shut up, and we're going to go enjoy the fruits of all this crap that was died for, bled for, sweat for, that was warred for. All that, it's time now for y'all to just sit down. And there's a reason why. It's not like back before there were any forms of mass communication in the stuff, in medieval times, all the men got together and go, hey guys, whatever we're going to do, we're going to oppress the women, right? We're on the same
Right.
page here. Okay. That didn't happen. No, it was by necessity. And then thank God we now have the opportunity to kind of define those roles cognitively as opposed to just naturally and as a need, as a means of necessity. And because of that, it's kind of this looking back on history with just this clear 2020 vision and thinking, oh, there was no coordination. Jordan Peterson brings this up a lot whenever he's talking to these fourth wave feminists. He's always like, you assume that there was zero cooperation between
Mm.
women and men. I can assure you, my grandmother didn't stay at home as a homemaker and thoroughly enjoy that, because my grandfather was a knuckle dragging, backwards buffoon that said, no, you will stay home and iron my shirts and
Mhm.
cook. No, that was not the case. They loved and adored each other. And she loved her role as a homemaker. She loved being able to support what he was doing on outside the home. And it was a coordination. It was, and I think that this whole demonizing of things that have just naturally happened over the course of time, that doesn't make things better. I think that, and I think we had reached a point in a lot of things, they were kind of naturally evolving to a place where there was more understanding of kind of like, if you're a wife that wants to be a homemaker, or if you're a young lady that aspires to, work for a while out of college or whatever, and then start a family and devote your life to that, that's fine. If you want to be a career person, that's fine. But then it became just kind of militant and kind of like, well, that's not good enough. Not only do we need to promote the ability of women to occupy the C-suite and the STEM sciences, all these different things. Not only do we need to promote that, but we need to tear men down in the process of raising women up. And that's what I think just is getting nuts these days, about how we try to, a lot of people try to engineer society. It's like there's this thought process, we must tear down this group in order to satisfactorily build up this other, and completely disregard the reasons why things have kind of shaken out the way they have in the first place. So I know I said a lot there, but I can get on this soapbox and preach for a while, because it's just like, I don't get it. I don't understand why it has to be so adversarial. Why can't, and it's like people creating problems out of whole cloth. And I don't know. It just doesn't seem, it seems like it's more regressive than progressive to me.
Yeah, and I think, just thinking out loud here as I listen to that, I think a lot of it's because of the worldview that we come from. I
Mm,
think the worldview in the West today is, and what we're taught is, consume at all costs, build at all costs. Like I say this often now, it's we keep talking about building and creating, and I think yes, we need to build and create, but we should build and create that's that which is beneficial to consume, right? And so I think a lot of it is we've lost the mindset of teammates, right? It's become like the guru on the stage, the famous guy that's going to solve your problems and teach you all the things. And so we went from a society, and I don't know, it was probably never perfect, but I just as I look back, I just go, seems to me that we went from a society that really did work together, not perfectly, but more so than we do now, to a bunch of people on islands in their own silos. And when that happens, what is that? That's a scarcity mindset. That's saying, I got to take care of mine first and foremost. And maybe that's, in the context of a man in his career and feeling like he has to be secure. And so that gets turned into then the wife feels she's oppressed. And it's like, well, the reason that I think your grandparents' story is the way that it is, and your story and your wife, and I think my wife and my story is because we're a team, right?
mhm,
And I learned really. I played baseball through college, and I had a coach one time and he taught me a lesson that I'll never forget. I'll take with me in everything I do. It's there's nobody on a team that's more important than their other teammates. They all
mhm,
have different roles, and the coach's job is to put them in the role that allows them to one thrive personally, but two benefit the team, the whole. And I think that we've gotten so far from that that now everybody's just in their own silos saying, I'm going to take care of mine because there's not enough to go around. And to me, that's what my podcast Operation Upgrade and is really about. And what I want to help teach these young guys is listen, if you go through life always just trying to get a bigger slice of the pie, you might end up with a lot of pie and a lot of misery. Because what's much better is to just help make the pie bigger. And I think to me, that's like it's not men are better than women, it's not women are better than men. It's that at the end of the day, if we know so I go back to we got to know what game we're playing. And then step number two is we got to know who we are on the team, right? And that takes some introspection. That takes community. That takes people around us who we're on the team with saying, hey, you're really good at this. Maybe you're not so good at that. And then that takes us having the ability to take some constructive criticism and say, hey, I might want to be the Friday night pitcher, but you know what? I'm better. I'm more valuable as a second baseman and be okay because you're on a team. And so, you know, I think it's like you said earlier, I don't like to speak in generalities. And so I try not to, but everybody's got a role. Everybody's got an identity. Everyone was created for something. And it's not that it's all about the collective because that can get just as dangerous as when it's all about the individual. It's all about finding the balance between you go out and you make it happen, you do what you want to do, you bring, you become the best you can be, but not primarily for your own benefit, not out of a scarcity mindset, but out of a mindset that wants to connect. Like why do I love having kids? Well, a big part of it is because like we were meant for connection. We love the connection with our kids. We love the connection with our wives. We love the connection with our family members. And it's like, well, then how do we take that mindset and how do we bring it out into our communities? And that's when I look back at COVID and my move and some of the decisions we made. I look back and I go, what I could have done way better and what I know now that I didn't know then is that when the whole world is focusing on separating from each other and dividing themselves into teams and dividing themselves into you're over here and I'm over here and I'm going to label you and you're going to label me, it's like, how can we be the ambassadors for let's reconcile and reconnect what's been disconnected?
You know, one of the things that I like to do is, or I've had, it's been kind of interesting to see. Have you ever seen the Whatever podcast? Have
No.
you ever, oh my gosh, okay, it's so terrible. It's so bad. It literally it will take the absolute worst case scenario of the modern woman, which is like an OnlyFans girl or something like
Mm,
that, and be interviewed by these guys that are kind of more like us. You know, even Michael Knowles from Daily Wire
mhm,
has been on there to talk to some of these girls that have been so misguided, that has said that basically, you know, prostituting their bodies out and just living for themselves, getting the money and everything, and just kind of saying that, and one day when they're ready, then they'll start the relationship. That's the course of life they
mm,
should take. Really sad, and it is worst case scenario. So it'll just make your blood boil to watch for a lot of reasons. One, just because they say just such stupid and asinine things, but also just because it's sad. You
Mm.
hate to see what these women become. But in a more controlled environment, one of the things that I've kind of enjoyed is I don't watch any TV other than but every once in a while, Mrs. Wright and I will try to find a limited series on Netflix or something like that. All right, so she had this one recommended to her that's out right now called Nobody Wants This.
Okay.
And it's about these two sisters. They have a podcast and they're kind of like and I didn't know the Call Her Daddy podcast. I didn't know what that
Mhm.
was until Kamala Harris went on there. And so then I heard about it, and then I kind of got the idea that it was kind of this fourth wave fourth wave feminist podcast where the girls talk a lot about sex and being single, and I guess probably the Chelsea Handler crowd that
Yep.
revels in being childless and full of one night stands, all this stuff. And so, but and then I heard Ben Shapiro say something about how he didn't like it, but Jimlin kept having people recommend it to her, and so I thought, well, let's just see what it's about. And I like Kristen Bell. She's married to
Mm.
Dax Shepard, who's an actor I think's funny. And so I thought, okay, if it's and generally like when I'm watching Netflix or Prime or anything, if I see anything that was made after the era that forced you, not forced you, but made you just get out of Washington, if it's made around 19 from 2019 to 2024, I probably don't want to watch it because it's going to be some just freaking beating you over the head with woke tropes or how to live your life and all this. But I thought, okay, we'll give it a try and see. And it's kind of funny because these two girls that have this podcast that's all about fourth wave feminism, living for yourself, go out, get drunk, get laid, do whatever you want, screw men, who cares? We don't need a man. Well, Kristen Bell, she's falling in love with this guy that's a rabbi and watching her evolution to where she is this hardcore bastion of modern day feminism, but all of a sudden she can't suppress
Mm.
this desire to, again, like kind of like to in your words, which I fully agree with, is to find that teammate that makes life more rich, which is a man to share life with and share these experiences. And she's going through this, and now her sister, who does the podcast with her, is just pissed because she's like, "Wait, that's everything we're against and everything."
Mhm.
It's kind of, I'm kind of, it's and look, it's not wholesome TV. It's not as bad as Sex in the City or something like that, but it's not wholesome TV. It's not something that I would recommend anybody watch just because it's now. I know why Ben Shapiro didn't like it because it does teach you a lot about Jewish tradition and stuff, but it's a very progressive. I mean, they're in
Mm.
LA, so it's a very progressive view of Judaism. But I told Jimlin last night, I said, it's interesting watching her struggle with wanting so badly to be on this island unto herself. I don't need a man. Screw it. I'm going to party and do all these things. And the way she's changing to actually want to change some of her behaviors for this guy. And I think that right there, man, I think that right there is the crux of it. We've taken this idea of, to use your analogy, which I think is superb, teammate. Okay, so let's say I'm Magic Johnson back in the 80s. Instead of thinking that, well, I'm going to have to, the coach has asked me to pass off the ball, so that makes me lesser, and I'm going to pass it off in an all-star game to my nemesis, Larry Bird.
Mhm.
I'm going to have to pass it off, and that's no. I need to keep the ball to myself. I need to score as many times as possible. Instead of saying, hey, just because you decide that you want to mate and that you're going to have to pass the ball to every once in a while in the form of maybe you act a different way, maybe you stay home when you really kind of want to go out because it benefits this other person, that doing things for another human being that you're trying to
Mhm.
build a connection with, that doesn't make you lesser. That doesn't mean you're being oppressed. That doesn't mean you're sacrificing yourself. What it means is you're building something even better, which is two people coming together into harmony, creating something more beautiful than you could ever create by yourself. That story just doesn't get told that much. Instead, it's like anything that comes in conflict with your fleshly desires and wants and your hedonistic behaviors, anything that comes into conflict with that should be just demonized, terminated, and abrogated from your life, because what matters is you, what you want.
Mm.
You are the God unto yourself. And I think it also plays into this deal of why we're having fewer and fewer children. When we live in this uber first world scenario that most of us get to live in now, not all of us, but then you can kind of satisfy more needs and pleasures all by yourself
Mhm.
without the family. So you start to believe this lie that it's going to be better and you end up lonely and miserable. And man, I tell you, Zach, I think in about 10 to 20 years, I think we already know that suicide rates are on the rise, depression is on the rise. We know that things are not good for the mental health of a lot of Americans these days. And I think in 10 to 20 years, man, it's going to be at such catastrophic rates when all this stuff really kind of comes to a head. And it's going to be sad. It's going to be really, really sad. And I hate it. And those of us like you and I who, by the way, people listening to my podcast today that don't agree with any of this, they think you and I are, again, we're knuckle dragging backwards and old
Mhm.
fashioned, whatever. Really, it's not because we're scared of what's happening, that we're anti-progressive, or that we want, nothing like that. It's just like we see what's happened. We know how this plays out, and the ending is not good. And I think that for me it's a lot of areas of life. I think this time we're living through right now, the adverse impacts of it when they start to fully manifest, it's going to be a tragedy for a lot of lives out there. And that's what I hate. I mean, not selfishly, I hate that the society that I'm a part of is kind of crumbling and regressing, but more than anything, also just on a human level, somebody that loves people and wants the best for people, to see the road that so many are going down. It's kind of sad, dude.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that's where hopefully guys like us can bring a different voice to the table. I just think that and that's one of the things that I decided with my podcast is, and it may be a little bit different than where I was before. Is we don't need any more voices in my mind that, that talk about the problem. We all know the problem. It's like we need voices who can stand up and say, well, let's talk about solutions. And so for me, I just look at it and I go, to me, so much of why we see what we do is because people don't know who they are and they're living in fear. And
Mhm.
so are we going to be the people that can come to them and say, hey, let's talk about what you're afraid of. Let's work through your fear. Let's figure out who you are and why you were created. Because to me, I think one of the things that I see a lot that I think, let's say the people who think the way that we do need to do a better job of collectively is, listen, we got to live lives that people look at and say, I really want that.
Mhm.
Like if people who say they believe in these things are getting divorced at the same rate and and committing adultery at the same rate, and their kids don't like them at the same rate, it's like, well, you're giving me information about what you say you believe, but your life doesn't produce the fruit that you
Mhm.
say what you believe would produce. And so for me, and that's not a guilt trip to me, it's just a, hey, we got to look in the mirror and say, have I actually been transformed
Mhm.
into somebody who can bring hope to a broken world, who can bring peace when there's fear. And so for me, I think it's just like, how do we continue to have conversations? Because I'll be really honest, I think guys like me and you, guys who have been like serial achievers, we're always trying to achieve things, we're always trying to do big things. It's really easy to find ourselves
Mhm.
meandering our way into the wrong stream, into the
Yep.
wrong flow, where it
Yep.
becomes about what we get and what our goals are and all those things, which aren't inherently bad in and of themselves. Like, I think that God put desires in us. When it becomes bad is when the desires become the main thing, right? And so for me, it's how do guys like us and gals as well, your wife, my wife, how do we start building community that says, listen, we, if we're going to save people from going through all that, the things that you said are coming, we're not going to do it by just giving them more information. We're going to do it by living transformed lives and helping them realize that they can live a transformed life as well. Like, I think so much of COVID, and I'm not trying to downplay people who died, but so much of COVID was driven by fear. All
Oh,
of it,
sure.
like so much of it, not all of it, a lot of it. And so to me, it's okay, well, that's just a microcosm. That was just showing everybody what's actually already inside everybody in America, everybody in the world. And so, what's the antidote to that? Is love. It's, if we want to get rid of fear, we got to love. And then, well, what does that mean? Because everyone today has a different definition of love. And so those are the conversations that I think really need to be had. And I'm not saying I have all the answers. I just think that if we keep doing what we've been doing, it'll just keep getting us the same results. We've got to start doing something different.
And I tell you, one of the things as a podcaster that pisses me off the most, and because okay, so back in the day, I don't know if I told you this when we talked the other day or not, but back before there were podcasts, before that was even a thing, I had an internet radio show,
Mm,
and it was a conservative talk show. And
okay.
so it was all politics. I mean, I was doing Ben Shapiro stuff before Ben Shapiro was ever a thing. He was still, well, he was, because he's just ridiculous, a prodigy. He was writing nationally syndicated columns, but he had not come on the scene as a media person.
Mm,
But what I decided back then, of course, that was right before I ran for city council, and I was like, I don't want to be a conservative talking head. I don't want to be a Sean Hannity. I don't want to be a Ben Shapiro now. I don't want to be in that deal. And now, as a podcaster, now that podcasting is a thing, it's so hard to break through just being just kind of a good guy out there, happy to tell anybody on either side of the aisle, I love you, want to talk to you, let's hang out, let's be friends, um, be understanding. People don't want that. It seems, I mean, all the biggest podcasts, all the biggest media outlets are either the red pill crowd that you mentioned, the Andrew Tates, and then there's that other guy that's just despicable. He's some young, very aggressive. I can't
mm,
remember what his name is. He's kind of that. Um, he's kind of the Andrew Tate type guy. I can't call his name, but it's either that or you're either hardcore left in politics or hardcore right, or you just talk about, you know, if you're a girl, the real popular podcasts are like Call Her Daddy, talk about
mhm,
sex, talk about all this stuff. And so when you're just guys like us, just trying to stay straight down the middle, just offer encouragement. Now I get a lot of, not a lot. That's I shouldn't say that. I do get some hate at times for my. I don't even talk conservative politics ever on my podcast, but just talk about conservative living, I suppose, or
mhm,
traditional living or whatever. There will be sometimes I'll take, some blows for that, for people, that just think that they sum you up. They just
mhm.
think that, oh, you live that life. Well, you must hate these people that
Right.
live this life. And it's like, yeah, I know you not at all. You don't understand me at all, but that's okay. That comes with the territory. But I can tell you, man, I mean, what are your like, I'll just ask you, podcaster to podcaster, knowing one, that it's so difficult to build that tribe and that audience out here in this vast sea of all other podcasts, as well as a message like ours, where we're not, I think you're like me, we're not going to come out here and start beating people over the head with stuff and saying, be all gregarious and all this stuff to try to get likes, get clicks, and get downloads. What is your take on that? And how are you, like, what is your vision or your strategy to get a group of people to come back and listen to your podcast and get what you want out of it and ignore what everybody thinks is a successful podcast, which all that comes down to is, I guess, downloads or whatever, which is a black box anyway. So what is kind of your strategy and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question, and I think it's takes waking up every day and recommitting to it. But my working life is in the commercial real estate world, commercial real estate investing, and I learned all that I knew when I got into real estate, and most of what I still know by reading things written about Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and Benjamin Graham, and Ken Fisher, and Peter Lynch, and these what we would call value investing greats. And one of the things that I just love is if you think about today, and this is not a judgment statement against this person, but you take somebody like Grant Cardone, he's famous online, he's allegedly worth billions of dollars. He knows how to market, he knows how to sell, he knows how to get people to come back. I don't gravitate towards his message. I gravitate towards Warren Buffett's. And I'm not here to make a judgment statement about Warren Buffett either. I just think that Warren Buffett, there was a book written about him called Snowball. And it's just this whole idea that building wealth is about starting with this little tiny snowball and rolling it and rolling it and rolling it. And then it gets so big, you can barely push it. And then eventually, if you're on top of a mountain, it'll catch its momentum and then you can't stop it. And so I use that analogy to say rage bait works, right? That's why we have the two polar ends controlling most of the conversation, but I think what we're talking about, it's a snowball. It's saying, listen, those guys are going to be the gurus. Those guys are going to be the famous guys on the stage. Those guys are going to be the people that other people idolize and they look to for all their answers. And what I'm saying is, No, I think actually each of us has part of the answer inside of us. And the reason that it's not coming to fruition is because we're not working together, because we're all trying to be like that. And instead, what I'm interested in is saying, hey, how do we get a bunch of us to come together and say, hey, Jason, sometimes you're going to be on the stage and sometimes he's going to be on the stage and sometimes she's going to be on the stage, but we're going to put you on the stage when your identity, when your gift, when your skills are most needed in that room for that circumstance. And it's going to be a movement about none of us. It's going to be a movement about something much bigger than us. And that's where I go. Like what we were talking about before is, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And I think that we are in a fast culture. Everything is fast, fast, fast. It's Grant Cardone, Grant Cardone. And I just think that what works best is Warren Buffett. I think it lasts longer. I think it has a bigger impact. It takes longer. You can't always see it, but that's why I think we need community. That's because it's lonely if you're out there doing it by yourself, especially when people are saying terrible things about you on the internet and they don't have the guts to even put their real name out there. It's like, you just have to know that, hey, I'm on a team with some other people who are invested in this the way that I am. Like when I think about the Bible, it wasn't a movement. I mean, there was a guy, Jesus, and then there was like 12 guys, and then it just kept growing, and it wasn't about any of the 12 guys. And it's like that message spread more than any message that's ever existed in the history of all messages in all of the earth. And I think there's something to that. And I think that's what I'm interested in, is like, how do we create the movement of people where it's not about me on a stage or you on a stage or my opinion or your opinion. It's about something much bigger.
Do you ever want to just check out? Like, I mean, I know that you're up there in Bozeman, right? In Bozeman, Montana?
Kalispell.
Oh, okay, even bigger. And I'm out here in Tyler in East Texas, and I it's one of the things that's hard for me, dude. There's a lot of times where I just want to check out and never be heard from again. I shut down all my social media here recently. I'm like, if you don't hear from me through my podcast or through, I'm going to keep trying to build my YouTube channel and stuff, but I'm like, if you don't hear from me on the podcast or whatever, I don't really care. I don't want you to hear from me. And I go through those phases, and and I know that, like, the last thing I ever want to be is like a Grant Cardone. I don't,
Mhm.
I don't know. I would rather, I don't know, dude. There's a lot of times, and I think that's probably my biggest struggle, where there's so many other people that want to be famous and be known and have, put, all these, people in seats and auditoriums and stuff. My dream is to just kind of one day have people go, whatever happened to Jason? Where'd that guy
Mhm.
go? And what's a struggle with that is, when you're like us, you're normal dudes. We're not Joe Rogan.
No.
We're not leveraging another career that had a massive audience and pulling it into our podcast like some of these comedians and stuff. We're just dudes that said, "Hey, I want to do this," and here we are. And you'll come into contact with people that they think that you crave the fame or you
Mhm.
crave something for it, and they put you in that box. That frustrates me, just because I'm like, little do you know that I do this. Now it is a creative outlet for me.
Mhm.
I take this as, kind of like building my birdhouse. Every time I create a podcast, it's like I built something. There's something good to that. I think we need that, in our mind or whatever. And I'm terrible with hammers and nails, so I build digital things like this. But really, dude, I kind of long for the day that I check out, and the only people that can find me are my 2 daughters and my wife, And so, do you ever struggle with that, or are you drawn to being in front of people, and you have such a strong desire to help that never even comes in conflict with you?
I would say it comes in conflict with me when, there's times where I'm like, I don't need to do this. So I don't really know why I need to sit here and let myself get riled up when people are saying things that bother me. And that's something that I've had to get used to and grow some thicker skin around. And I'm sure everybody that's ever put themselves out there, has some level of that feeling. But at the same time, I look back in my life and I go, man, I simply would not be where I am today if there weren't guys and gals that were willing to take all the arrows in their
Yeah.
back, teaching me the things that a whole bunch of other people probably didn't agree with, and a whole bunch of people would have said bad things about. And so for me, it's like I said when I started the podcast, I think at heart I'm a teacher, and I want to share the things, the lessons that I've learned. I I want to share where I've said, hey, I like maybe there was a time in my life where I bought into the Grant Cardone world, not in real estate, but like in athletics, right? I wanted to be a famous baseball player. And it's like nobody ever, I shouldn't say nobody. I don't remember anybody ever sitting me down and saying, okay, Zach, but why? Is that really going to fulfill you? Is that really what you were created for? Is that really like, what is the bigger picture? Because if the goal is just about you, you very well may attain it and you will feel empty inside. And so for me, I think that's so much of why I'm driven to help these younger guys is because I want to say, hey, listen, there's a way that seems right to a man. And it might look right in the culture that we live in, but I promise you it ends in internal conflict, some level of pain, some level of dissatisfaction, and then you're like, how the hell did I get here? And so
Mhm.
for me, I just think, yeah, there's times where I just say, I don't need to do this. Maybe it's not, maybe I wonder if it's worth it, but I just keep thinking back to like I am where I am today because there were other guys and gals who were willing to, just keep doing it and keep at it and continuing to share their story and their wisdom. And it's like, hey, I mean, I think that's the least that I can do.
Yeah, and you know what I've done too lately that I think about, and the podcast plays into this, is I treat life one of my buddies, Ryan McKenzie. I hope Ryan listens to this episode
Mhm.
just because I gave him a shout. A great guy, one of my favorite humans on earth. We grew up together, and he started talking about ROE, return on experiences.
Mm,
And I think when you start to look at ROE versus ROI, which is always going to be a metric in the finance world, and it's important. You've got to, if you're going to, opportunity costs are
yeah.
going to suggest that you should always look at the return on investment of whatever opportunity you decide to pursue. I get that. But whenever you start really banking on those return on experiences and making that the priority, and I can't say that I really made a cognitive effort to do that. It just sort of naturally evolved when all of a sudden I realized so much of what I was doing, it was not financially rewarding. It
Mm,
was not ego. It wasn't a reward to my ego, but man, the experiences I just loved and adored. Like, I may write a book that nobody will ever read. I just
right.
finished writing a novel today. I just got the
Mm,
first draft edited and it's ready to go. No one will probably ever read it. I mean, the likelihood in 2024 of being a nobody like me getting a novel that a bunch of people actually read is slim and none. But man, I had a blast doing it.
mm,
I mean, I have created that. It's mine. I did that. Um, and I think that's one of the things that I try to uh, convey to young men these days, especially young family men, is bank on the experiences, create those experiences, and don't neglect them, and don't think just because there is no return on investment that you don't always make it a dollars and cents type deal. And that's where the older I get, man, the less, and I like to think that part of it, of the gaming of life, is stepping out of the matrix. And now more than ever, dude, it's weird. um the whole idea, I know, has been overdone. It's been done to death of, the matrix and, where we
mhm,
are. But when you really start to step out of it, then you do look at everything. You look at all these people, like right now, the political, like the campaigns that are going
mhm,
on, the presidential election. Now I'm interested and I watch it and I talk about it some, but also it falls way below my list of things that I'm going to let rile me up because I can't do anything about it. That's for the matrix. That's for the matrix is out there trying to decide who their leaders are going to be.
yeah,
And I will render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and I will abide by the law, and I have my opinions and all that. So I'm not saying I'm completely
yeah,
immune to it by any means. I mean, I've been in the political world for years on different levels, but it's like it's nice when you get to this point where you start to just kind of game life in such a way that what the world's priorities are, you look at is kind of like just cheap and almost like counterfeit. And that's one of the things that the older I get, the easier that attitude becomes. I mean, that make sense? Do you relate to that at all?
yeah. I think so. I think that when I look at so much of what's going on in the world and in our country, um, a couple years ago, I probably would have been a lot more involved, a lot more opinionated, a lot more willing to share my opinions, which I still have. But at the
Mm.
same time, I think what's changed in me, what's really been transformed, is it's like I look at it now and I just go, "There's a bunch of people who don't know who they are. There's a bunch of people who are afraid, and nobody's help." And so I just look and I go, and I've always been a little bit of a contrarian. I think that's something you have to be if you want to be a good investor, right? Like that's how you get that's how you don't revert to the mean, is you're doing things that other people aren't doing because you see things that they don't see, or at least that's your hypothesis. And so when I look and I go, we're in a world where everyone's just devouring each other. They're separating onto teams. They're fighting. They're afraid. Even the conservative people are afraid. The liberal people are afraid. Everybody's afraid. And I go, so what can I bring to the table that's not more noise in a noisy environment? What I hope to bring to the table is say, okay, well, let's talk about what we're afraid of, and let's talk about reconciliation. Because I'm not saying that I just jump on board with stuff that I don't agree with, but I don't think just continuing to spew more hatred information is changing anything. And so to me, it's like, well, how are we going to do that? And I think we don't do that. We don't do that by telling people things that we haven't actually lived and experienced, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it's about, okay, first and foremost, does my family and does my life look like the things that I say I believe? And if it does, is it reasonably attractive to people who maybe don't have that? Maybe they are living in fear. Maybe they see that we're living in peace, or whatever it might be. And it's just like, I don't need to sit there and shout at them from the rooftops, like, here's the 5 steps to financial freedom, because financial freedom is not the same for everybody. The steps aren't the same. Like I'm so over this, the 5 steps and the here's the blueprint and the framework and all this stuff. It's like when I read my Bible, God usually did things that everyone thought was completely insane to solve problems. And I'm just like, I've lived that life, and I just look at it and I go, and listen, I love where we're at. I feel so blessed and so grateful. But I go, if we want to get from where we are to where we hope to be as a country, as a community, as a state, city, whatever it is, like, we can't just keep doing what we've been doing. And what we've been doing is, here's the 5 steps, and here's how I'm going to yell at you and tell you how stupid you are. And I just feel like, well, let's get a group of people together and say, how can we do it differently?
Yeah, that's kind of where the whole mantra for this show. I'll give you the whole backstory on improve always in all ways. It started out reading Walter Isaacson's book
Mm.
about Leonardo da Vinci,
Yep.
and I'd always seen Vitruvian Man,
Mm-hmm.
but never thought anything about it. In fact, I don't think I knew that. One, I didn't know that Da Vinci's drawing of Vitruvian Man was Da Vinci. I didn't know
Yep.
that he drew it. Secondly, I didn't know that that was not the first one, that Vitruvian Man as a thing was a concept
Yeah.
that originated in architecture with Vitruvius during the reign of Augustus. And so I start reading about that. And there's this whole universal theme that happens with cities and buildings being constructed in the form of a human body. And then all the way to the point where, we as Christians, we are taught that Christ is the head of the church and
Mm-hmm.
that we are the body. And so it's like it's almost figurative as well as literal in terms of what it is. And then I learned that Da Vinci was trying to draw the perfectly proportioned man. That's what his Vitruvian Man was. He made this perfect measurement from forehead to nose to top lip, all these things. He wanted to see what the perfectly proportioned human being would look like. And then that's whenever I was like, how could I make myself the most perfectly proportioned version of myself possible, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally, all these different things. I was like, I'm never going to reach perfection, but that became kind of this internal theme. And then it was like, well, you got to improve always in every way. You got to constantly be focused on your emotional health, your spiritual health, your physical health, your how you communicate with people, and so it just became this obsession with, again, not some, like you say, not some 5-step program to lose 20 pounds or to gain lean
Right.
body mass, something like that. It was more of just a day-to-day effort, kind of that James Clear atomic habit of 1% improvement each and every day, compounded on just becoming a better version of myself. Because I believe, and I think this is what you believe as well, if we can inspire others to kind of like they talk about on an airplane, put your mask on first,
Mm.
because unless you're okay, you can't help anybody else. So if we can encourage more people to be the absolute best version of themselves in an effort to then be more capable and better able to serve the communities, the families in which they exist, and to be inspiration to them, then that's how we kind of multiply, had this multiplying and an exponential effect. And so that's how this whole thing started,
Mm.
is like, and then the whole improve always in always, just it doesn't have to be one way or another. It needs to be, just because you're ripped and you're jacked and you're lean and you're 3% body fat, but your wife hates you, your kids aren't talking to you, then, well, you're not doing it right. And by the same token, you got your wife and your kids love and adore you, but you're obese and you've got hypertension and you're going to die before you should. Well, that's not good either. It's just taking this trying to reach perfect proportion, knowing you're never going to get there, but always seeking to be better. If we could do that, that's what I want to inspire people to do. It's not just some vanity project. It's always trying to be the best version of yourself. And life frankly is more fun when you feel good, you feel healthy, you feel like you're keeping yourself in a position. Because I've got some family members, dude, they haven't taken care of themselves, and they can't help anybody that needs.
Right.
There are people that need help, and they can't
Yep.
do anything for them. And that makes me sad. And I like to keep myself able and physically, mentally, and emotionally able to help people. And I think that's if we can get. And because I tell you one thing, dude, politics isn't going to save us. The politicians are not going to save us. And that's why it's so crazy. We get so jazzed up because they do have so much power over our kind of what's going on. But man, it is not that. If anything has been proven over the course of especially the last, few decades, it ain't going to be the politicians that save us from ourselves. That's for sure. So we better find another solution for what ails us.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you were talking about with people and their health, or maybe it's their mindset or their finances or whatever. It's like, I think that's where maybe my message is I hope going to be a little bit different. Is like, I am a serial learner. I'm super curious. I'm a high performer. I strive for excellence. Like, if you talk to people about who I am, those are the things they would say. And yet what I've really come to discover over the last year or so is there's a fine line between doing to be and being to do, right?
Mm.
And
Mhm.
so I think that where we got to be really careful is, yeah, I totally agree, always improving in all the ways, but doing it from a place of knowing who you are,
Oh yeah.
as opposed to trying to be someone you're not. And I think that's where, in the performance culture, right? Like, I can't go on YouTube, and a part of it's just because what I watch and what I'm interested in, but it's like 20 ways to get rich and money about this and money about this, as if, money's going to solve, or your business is going to solve all your problems. And it's just like, listen, and I get it, right? That's their niche. That's the message that they want to convey. And I'm just sitting here saying, you can do all those things. But if you're doing them, like, let's say you're the guy that wants to be 3% body fat. If you're doing that because you think it's going to make you somebody you're not currently, right? It's going to give you the confidence that you don't have. Yeah, it might for a minute, and then you're going to find some other thing where you don't know who you are, where you're afraid, and you're going to fall into some other trap where you're living a lie, and you just always constantly feel like a copycat. And to me, I think it's about, like, how do we awaken in people? You don't have to be like the guy you watch on YouTube. You don't have to be like the singer that you heard sing the song that you love. You just got to figure out, who did God make you to be, and what is your role in this game, and then how do you go and be the best that you can be in that, right? Because I think a lot of the things that you and I are talking about, which is like, get better at this and grow this way because you can help more people, I think a lot of those things come more naturally, and they come a lot easier when we're doing it from a place of rest, because we know who we are and what we were created to do, than when we're striving to become somebody that we're not.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And that took a long time for me. I came from a fixed mindset where it was all about performance. I mean, and in fact, it was more important to me and this audience has heard me talk about this ad nauseum, that it was more important to me to look the part than to actually be the part. And dude, what happens when you do that, when you do like what Beth Moore says, she had a great quote years ago where she said, most people go to church in the witness protection program. I think most people live their lives in the
Yeah.
witness protection program. And I did that forever, man. I was supposed to, I created this image of myself. And so then I had to live up to this image I created and never stopped to ask myself, who am I? What
Mhm.
really makes me tick? What's the
Yep.
best version of whatever I am? What does that even look like? Well, you can't even know what the best version is if you don't even know what you really are and what you're meant to do and what you're called to do. And here recently, I kind of boiled down my greatest strength and what I want to do. Like you say, teacher, I agree with that. I like to teach, but I think my superpower is being an encourager. I think
Mm,
that is something that I have noticed, that of all my gifts and talents, if I find what your strength is, I'm very good at pulling it out of you and
mm,
encouraging you to understand your capabilities and that you are made for more. And I think that's something. I can't remember somebody that, there was a quote I read one time that I don't know if this is a paraphrase, but basically the hardest thing you can be is yourself. And
yeah,
it's so hard for certain people. And I was that person that I would strive for all the wrong reasons. It's one of the reasons why I don't get on social media is because, or I go back and forth, is because I want to show people cool things, but I also don't want people to think I'm trying to say, I know, so you should.
yeah,
I hate that. I don't want to be that. That's why a lot of times I think if I come back on social media, if you look at mine and Jimlin's videos on our retail account for our business, which is all that, when I'm in those videos, I'm just a freaking clown. I mean, people listen to this show and they think I'm this serious guy because I've got the Healthy CEO
right.
podcast, right show, and improve always and always. I'm a freaking clown, dude. And I have more fun whenever I'm just making a complete ass of myself than I'm doing anything else. And so, that to me is what I enjoy. But you're right, people trying to be something they're not for reasons like affirmation and all that. I think it's sad. And I think it's one of the greatest things that happened to me whenever I turned 40. I always tell people that's when my I don't give a flip meter just
Yeah.
pegged, where you start to be comfortable with who you are. You accept your deficiencies. I've got many of them. I have a horrible attention to minor details. I don't like administrative tasks. I don't like, there's so many different things I've learned that I'm just not good at. And I'm okay with it. I don't
Yeah.
have to be good at everything. I just need to, I just said, like I said, I want to improve in those areas that matter most and have the greatest impact on the people around me and that feed into who I know I am. And I'm comfortable with that. And also, when you do that, dude, I think of course, I study a lot of Stoic philosophy. So you're a lot less likely to be offended by things when you truly know who you are and you're comfortable
Totally.
with it. Because you know that most of the people that are throwing the arrows, they don't know you. They have no idea, and you don't, and your opinion, it just kind of bounces off, and I don't know, I think that's a really, really important, thing for people, just to know who the heck you are.
Yeah, one of my favorite guys that I like listening to, he says that your true identity is your gift to the world, right? So when you're going into a room, and so when I think about Operation Upgrade, one of the things that I talk about every once in a while is it's like, where are you in just being who you are, helping to upgrade the lives of the people around you, and that's usually a pretty good indication of like who you really are. And so it's, I think the craziest part is that if our true identity is truly our gift to the world, or God's gift to the world through us, and it's the number one thing that we're trying to put a veil or a cloak over, we're
Yep.
literally robbing the world of the gift that was supposed to be given. And so that's where I, so much of what I want to help young guys with is, like, I talked to a guy who's 20 years old a couple weeks ago, and he wants to get into real estate. And it's like, hey, I can talk to you about that, but before we do that, let's talk about why you want to get into real estate. What
Yep.
is it? Because a lot of guys is just like, oh, I think I can get rich. And it's like, well, I'm not saying don't get rich. I'm not saying you can't get rich. I'm just saying that if that's the only reason you're going into it, you might get rich and you won't be very happy. So let's figure out, do you know what game you're playing? Do you know what role you have on the team? Do you know what your skill sets are and what you're not so good at? Do you know, based on those things, who you need to surround yourself with, right? And so to me, it's about going from a separated world to how do we become more connected, because we go further when we go together.
Yeah, 100%. All right, give me some books to read. I'm a voracious reader. I love books. I can tell you put your nose in a book on occasion.
Yeah.
What are some books this audience should look into? And I'll probably know some of them so we can riff on them for a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. One book that I read this year that I thought was really good was 10x is easier than 2x, which you may have read.
I have that one's on my list. I have not read it yet. Who Remind me who wrote that?
That's Ben Hardy and Dan Sullivan.
There you go. I know Dan Sullivan. I didn't know Ben Hardy, but yes, Dan Sullivan. Okay, go ahead.
And then, that's like a trilogy of books. So it's Who Not How, 10x is easier than 2x, and then the gap in the gain. The gap in the gain was really good as well. Talked a lot about some of the things we talk about, which I think for anybody who's a striver or an achiever, like that's a really good book. Um, I read another one this year that I thought was pretty good, Never Enough.
Mm-hmm.
Another
Yep.
one I read, which was Die with Nothing. That was pretty good.
Which, by the way, never enough. So we have a mutual. What's the author's name?
I can't remember.
Okay, I'll look it up. So I tried to get him on my podcast. He said my podcast wasn't big enough for him to come on. First time anybody's ever told me that. He and I actually, he's a former Navy SEAL, right?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure.
Michael, what's his name? I mean, very, very nice. He was a very nice rejection, but essentially said, "Hey, dude, you're doing great, but you just don't seem to be big
Sure.
enough for me. I only go on Fox News or whatever." I'm like, well, 50,000 downloads is probably what you get out of it, and
Right.
it's long form interview. But I get it. It's my fault for not marketing myself
Yeah.
better. But we have a mutual friend. But I have that book because of that, because I wanted to get it read
Mm.
before I got him on my podcast. So, I'm still going to read the book. But when you say never enough, I'm like, that was rejection.
Yeah, another one that a lot of what I've been talking about today comes from a guy that I've been really learning a lot from recently. His name's Jamie Winship,
Hmm.
and he wrote a book called Living Fearlessly,
I like that.
and that's really good, man. That guy, yeah, he's really helped me in a lot of ways. So I would say
Can
those
you
are
give
some
me an
really
anecdote
good books.
from it? Give me an anecdote from like living fearlessly, because that's one of the things. I'll be honest with you, Zach. I deal with not so much now, but a lot of the decisions I've made in business and life have been as a result of fear. So,
Yep.
what are some of the things that he says that's kind of stuck out as far as overcoming some of the fears that we might have?
Yeah, so I mean, his whole thing, like when I talked about internal conflict, that's comes from some of what I've learned from him, which he says he spent. So it's a really cool story. He started out as a police officer in Washington D.C., and then he was there for 5 years, and he's got these crazy stories. And then he got basically recruited to go into the CIA, and then he served for almost 30 years in combat war zones, mostly in the Middle East and in mostly Muslim countries. And the stories that this guy has are just insane, and talk about like real transformation. And so what he talks about is the reason that our peace deals never work, the reason that there's always war is because internal conflict always leads to external conflict, right? If you're not at peace internally, you can't bring peace externally. And so then he says, okay, well, what is it that creates internal conflict? And it's always fear,
Mm.
right? And so he has a process that he takes people through where you can basically get rid of your fear, and then you live fearlessly. That's the whole purpose of the book. But I was very similar. It's so funny too, because like I've always said, oh, I'm not a fearful guy, and then I start looking back in as I'm reading this and I'm listening to a bunch of his videos on YouTube, and I'm really diving in. I was like, man, I'm way more afraid than I ever thought or I ever realized. And so it's, what would life look like if we stopped living in fear? And that's what he talks about all the time. Like the reason that we separate, the reason we put each other on teams and we label each other is because there's something that the other person's doing that's making us afraid, even if we call it something else. And I thought about like, yeah, in COVID, and I'm watching all the insanity going on where I lived, and I was like, I am afraid that my kids are going to have to live in a world that's completely screwed up, and it's going to impact their lives negatively. It's like, and you just go into this fear vortex, and I'm sitting here telling all those people that they're afraid. That's why they got like 7 masks on. And meanwhile, I'm making these decisions to separate myself because I'm afraid. And so his whole point is, that's why there's never reconciliation, because you're acting in fear and they're acting in fear. And all we need is people to come in and say, hey, I'm not afraid. And I want to help y'all stop hating each other, stop labeling each other. And I'm telling you, like, of all the things that I've experienced in my life, the things I've learned from him have changed me more than anything that I've ever experienced. And it's because, yeah, I just realized that even so much of why we achieve is because we're afraid. And then I
Well,
just go, what does life look like if we live without that fear? Totally different.
all right. Well, and here it is, living fearless. Jamie Winship. That's the
Yeah.
one. All right. I'm buying it right now.
Yeah, you're gonna love it. And
Okay.
if you want, you can I'll send you some videos you can watch on YouTube, but what a guy. So I actually signed up. He's got a course you can go through, and then he has a live in-person thing in Atlanta in April, and I signed up for both of those, and I'm going to go.
Love it. All right. Deal. Well, I just got the book. So any others you want
Cool.
to mention?
Uh Any topics specifically?
Anything, dude. Anything that's enriched your life. I don't care.
I'm looking over at a bunch of books on my desk over there. If you like investing, there's a new book that the guy wrote that's not very well known. It's called Quality Investing.
Okay.
And, I thought it was really good. As I said, a lot of my investing journey started with, like, the great value investors, and as people who've studied value investing probably know, like, Warren Buffett morphed from a value investor to something else that nobody really can articulate, and this guy, in his book, he tries to basically tell you what he thinks it is, which is quality investing. So not growth, not value, but quality. And I thought he made some really compelling cases, and I thought that was a really good book. So that's a good one for investing.
I'll look into that one too because I'm the same thing. I've been a student of both Graham and Charlie Munger and Buffett forever. The thing that Buffett seems to be really good at is he's really good at identifying great leadership. You know, when he buys when Berkshire buys a company, he buys it as much for the people that are there and the leadership's there that's there as he does the actual company he's acquiring. And he seems to have a really good gauge on that. Um, but I think that's yeah, it's crazy. He is obviously an outlier, but the thing that I think that blows most people's minds is that the yes, he's brilliant. He's a
Hmm.
genius. But also there's a lot of just time-honored principles that he
Oh,
just I think his superpower is his discipline. I
yeah.
think that's what it boils down to. Am I right?
Yeah, it's his discipline, it's his willing to play the long game, I
Yeah.
think especially in the co like, I can I've been studying him long enough that I've gone through, I think, probably 2 market cycles where I can actually look back and see where people would say, "Oh, he's lost the touch because 'cause you're in a down market." Or no, because 'cause you're in an up market and he's not doing as good as some of the other guys, and then you go into a down market and he just destroys everybody, and
Yeah.
it's just like but to me, um that's what I love is the principles that work in life. They work in all times, in all
Yeah.
environments, and yet everybody is always trying to sell the next shiny thing, the next hack, the next this, and it's like, hey, if you're just willing to play the long game and you're just willing to use time-honored principles, you don't have to worry about all that, right? And so I think in a culture that's got complete information overload, everybody's trying 9 million things, not sure why nothing's working. It's like, well, because you're doing all the wrong things.
I agree, and it's funny. I didn't mean to do this. Honestly, I didn't. I was speaking at University of Texas, Tyler. I used to do this speaking deal every year for I don't know. It was like a lot of professionals from around town would go speak to classes about
Mhm.
different things. I would always go speak on entrepreneurship, and I told these kids, I said, well, one of the things that you can do at your age, go find an index 500 fund, plunk $1,000 or whatever you can in there and just invest a little bit for the
Sure.
rest of your life as much as you can. Just let it go over time. That should be the first thing you do from an investment standpoint
Sure.
in building wealth. Well, and I said, and it's not rocket science. If you do that, the odds of you becoming a millionaire by the time you're 60 are far greater than you
Oh,
not,
yeah.
with history as our guide, right? Well, I didn't realize that the guy that was speaking after me was a financial advisor. And he emailed me after. He said, well, Jason, I'd love to visit with you. And he said, I agree that you can do that, but it's not quite that simple. I'm like, but it is.
It is.
I mean, I'm glad you're here. And I think that I'm not saying I'm opposed to financial advisors. I mean, I have one as well
Sure.
that I work with, but it was kind of funny. I felt bad because I'm like, yeah, it's this easy, kids. And, Vanguard's really inexpensive on their fees.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean to do that. But it's true that what worked 100 years ago, it may not work exactly the same. It may not even work. We may have something new. But man, you just got. That's what I've started doing. Is started just betting the odds. I tried when I was younger. I came out of undergrad during the .com boom, and
Mm.
so I thought I was doing well, riding high with stocks like Cisco and Juniper, Webvan, companies that aren't even around
Right.
anymore. I was there, and it made me. I would make $1,000 an hour just doing a little day trading on some goofy stuff that me and my buddies had talked about. I mean, it was just throwing darts at a board is all I was doing, but I thought I was real smart. And then, of course, after everything popped and I lost some money, I realized it goes back to what we're saying. Know who you are. I'm not gonna sit and whip spreadsheets and try to be an active investor,
Sure.
unless it's like real estate and stuff like that I've done. It's more tangible and more, I understand it. But when it comes to the market, I'm not going to beat the institutions. There's no way. So I'm gonna go with what I know.
Yes.
And two, I do think that's one of the best things about being old, like I am, nearly 50 years old, is that I've now survived in real estate, as a matter of fact, my real estate brokerage during the financial crash of '07, '08, made it through that fine. I've seen that. We've seen COVID. We've seen so many things. So what you realize is that there's a resiliency in the markets and in finance and just the way the world works that if you do, like you said, just play the long game. Don't get excited. Don't give yourself too much credit. Don't beat yourself up too
Right.
bad. And just have that long term horizon. You just be better off instead of trying to do the next new thing.
Yeah, and if all hell breaks loose and things don't look anything like they did or like we thought they would, guess what? The people who know how to create value will probably be okay. And so I think that's where I just keep going back to, like, when we talk to these young guys, is who was it, Albert Einstein or whoever has said, "Don't strive to be a person of significance, but of value." And I think at the end
Yes.
of the day, what we get rewarded for in life when we do it morally, which is what we want, is for creating value. And so, how do you create the most value? Well, it's knowing what you bring to the table. It's knowing your identity. It's knowing who you are and what you're good at. And it's staying away. Like, one of the things I think about all the time, whether it's investing or business, is if your competition is somebody who genuinely loves what they're doing because it's who they were created to be, it's doing what they were created to do, and you don't, you will lose in the long run.
Yep.
You just will, because they're not do it's going back to like being to do instead of doing to be, or vice versa. It's like they're not doing it because they're trying to be something or earn something. They're doing it because it's what they were meant to do, and they're
Yep.
going to be better than you at it. And so it's like we got to find ways where we're doing what we were meant to do, because that's ultimately. And so another book, I was just looking through my list. I thought this one was good, which you may have read. Was Buy Back Your Time.
Oh yeah.
And so, but the takeaway, and I think he mentioned it in that book, but, and again, this is where my perspective is just maybe a hair different. It's like, I think that what's so powerful about that book is, while people want to poo poo business owners and all this stuff, it's like, guess what? If you're actually willing to buy back your time, you're going to give people jobs and a standard of living and a livelihood that they never would have had, that they hopefully love and are really good at, and it energizes them. And that's what teamwork is. And
Yep.
so I thought that was a really good book.
Yeah, I actually, I invited Dan onto the show, and we exchanged DMs, and then he said, as part of actually one of his team members after that he put me in touch with, said, as part of buying back his time, he's not taking any podcast requests right now, and he's got so many, as you can imagine.
Oh, I'm sure.
Uh, but I would love to talk to him, because essentially, I'll tell you who else preaches that principle is Naval Ravikant.
Yeah.
That's one of
Mhm.
the things he says,
Yep.
and I learned that, and I'm not good at it. That's one of my biggest it's like you asked me, "Do you have a team that's doing all your stuff?" I'm like, "No, I
Right.
should. I
Yeah.
should." That's a great example of it. But I remember the first time I really realized the principle of this, and this is what I've tried to do is I do like novel, I have an hourly wage
Mhm.
that in my mind, that my
Yep.
time is worth. And, I remember it's gone up quite a bit since I made this decision, but I remember when the first company I ever bought, that first real estate business I bought
Mm.
that I told you about, bought an office building, and I'd mow the grass because I thought,
Yeah.
out there on Loop 323 in Tyler, Texas, you'd see the owner of the company mowing the yard at the little strip of grass out in front of my
Right.
office building. I was like, "I can't afford to hire anybody, and I'm a bootstrapper, and I gotta every penny matters."
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, I realized, as I started to kinda get these concepts, and this is for the listener out there, if you're doing that, in that instance, I was the highest priced lawn boy in all of Tyler. My
Right.
time, it comes to opportunity costs. I'm sitting there, and even if it's not a dollar amount, I would usually do it after work. Okay, so what's it worth? Is it really worth saving? At the time, I probably could have got it done for 30 bucks.
Right.
30 bucks, is it really worth that to not be at home with my daughters, Rylan and Abby, and hanging
Yeah.
out with them and playing with them? There's and you when you start to truly value
Yep.
your time, and that's the thing too, I'll tell you, Zach, my time has become the single most precious non-renewable resource I have. And when you start to look at that, when you start to realize we're all gonna die, what are you doing with your time? Are you
Mhm.
spending it with people? Are you spending it like this? This is some total iron sharpening iron.
Sure.
You're pouring into me, vice versa. What are you doing with that time? Because everything you and I saying yes to this conversation means that we said no to everything else we could be doing right now.
Right.
And my wife, who I adore, and she's like that. I told you she started our retail business 14 years ago. It's become a Tyler institution.
Mm.
She's done it by the sweat of her brow. And one of the things I've had to convey to her as the business has grown, it's like, hey, you've got to get somebody else to do that for you because your time is just too valuable for that. And so it's not so whenever, and I think you'd agree with me, when Zach and I tell you folks about buying back your time, it's not just about letting other people do things so you can just go kick back by the pool, but it's so that you can go kind of what we've talked about here too, build upon this. It's like, go let other people do the things that just because you can do it doesn't mean is where you would be serving either your business, your family, your net worth, in the best capacity. Go do the things where you're going to have the highest impact and the highest yield on your time. I mean,
100%. And I think that's where, if we go back to almost the very beginning of this conversation when we were talking about men and women and roles and this and that, it's like we also have to realize it's the roles. We're having the same fights, not just between men and women, but between employers and employees, the haves, the have nots. And it's like, are there things that need to be fixed in those equations? Absolutely. But there are also realities that some people are given gifts, right, that have a higher value to society. It doesn't mean they're more valuable as people, right? We're all of the same inherent value. But what it means is that, like, I don't have the same gift as Warren Buffett or Bill Gates when he created software to impact 2 billion or 3 billion or 7 billion people on the globe. He's going to inherently end up with more monetary value in exchange for the value he created in the world than I am, because his value touched more people's lives. What I think what I think applies no matter who you are, whether you're at the top of that spectrum or the bottom, is, are you putting yourself in position on a daily basis? Are you trying to continue to put yourself in a position on a daily basis to provide the most value you're capable of providing? Not because you have to, but because it's who you are. And so I think that's where, like we talked about in the team environment, sometimes we have to be okay with the fact that, like, we're not the team captain this year, right?
that's
We
right.
might be the second string second baseman or the third string pitcher, or we might be the dang bat boy, right? But if we're operating in our true identity and we're not jealous and we're not competing, we're not protecting and promoting ourselves, but we're just like, hey, I want to be a part of a team, then we'll be okay there. And so, to me, I think that so much of it comes down to, yes, what we're talking about in buying back our time isn't like, hey, let's make the plebs do the work we don't want to do. It's saying that I think that God's shown me, or I've learned, however you want to talk about it, I've learned what I'm really good at. And it's better for the people around me, for the community that I'm a part of, if I'm doing that really well most of the time. And in order to do that, I have to find somebody else who cuts the lawn really well and they enjoy it. And like I had a meeting yesterday with the guy that cuts my lawn. And he said, I never realized what joy I would get out of, like, making people's lawns look like a more beautiful creation than what already existed. And I'm like, exactly. Right.
Mhm.
I would have robbed him, or to some degree, of that satisfaction, of that learning experience, of the money that came from it, if I was like, no, I'm going to mow my own grass. And so I just think it's a mindset shift. Like, people have to start thinking of things differently. And when they do, I think, listen, their lives will get upgraded.
100%. All right, Zach, I got to go pick up a fluffy dog that's at the vet. So that's how I've got to spend my next amount of time. How can people find you and keep up with you, man?
Yeah, appreciate that. So probably the easiest is operationupgrade.org. That's the podcast that I've started. I've got 3 episodes up now. So I appreciate you having me on. This is a big thing for me. I really do appreciate it. But operationupgrade.org. I'm also on pretty much all the social media channels. Z for Zach Kosturos, Kosturos is my handle on most of those. So Z Kosturos, or operationupgrade.org.
Fantastic. And hey, man, don't let this be, I want this to be a regular deal. And let's invite some more guys to come on to
Yep.
both of our shows. Let's keep this going. And folks, please, if you would, share this with people that you think might be interested, that could benefit from it. Give me some ideas. I would love to have Zach back on just to tackle some of these issues. And if you're fathers or mothers of young men and we can somehow put something together to help out, I know I'd love to do that. And I feel like Zach would too. And with that, man, Zach, I appreciate it, brother. I'm so glad this friendship has started, and look forward to keeping it going. And thanks so much for listening, folks. I'm Jason. He's Zach, and we're out.
See ya.
Well, that does it for this episode of The Jason Wright Show. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a Texas Titan Media production. Fourth Wall did the music. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Please consider going out to jasonwrightnow.com and signing up for the Vitruvian Letter. Also, please go out to iTunes. It takes like 30 seconds to just leave us a 5-star rating. It does wonders for the podcast. I would be so grateful. And with that, until we meet again, go crush it and endeavor to improve always in all ways. I'm out.